Rancher lived alone for years until the Bigfoot tossed a woman into his barn. The rancher thought solitude was his only companion. Until one stormy night, tracks too large for any man led him to the barn. Inside the straw, a woman lay broken, breathing, left by something far greater than he could fathom. Through the mist, a towering figure lingered, its breath heavy, its silence louder than thunder. Yet it did not strike. It retreated, as if entrusting her to his care. By the fire's glow, he laid down his rifle and whispered, "Not every shadow harms." And as the giant vanished into the woods, the rancher knew, some legends do not haunt us. Some heal. A towering figure shattered the silence, leaving a mystery beneath the cold moon. The winter wind howled through the mountain pass, stretching into eerie cries like the mourning of a wild land that had never been tamed. Down in the White Valley, a small ranch stood alone in the endless sea of snow. From the wooden cabin, a lantern flickered faintly, its trembling flame fighting back the night. There, Elias Cooper had lived by himself for many years with only an old horse, a loyal dog, and his cattle for company. Elias once had a family. He once knew laughter, the warmth of evenings, shared the tender embrace of a young wife. But illness, misfortune, and the harshness of the West had taken it all away. Since then, he had only memories. Each day he moved like a shadow, feeding the horse at dawn, sitting silently by the fire at night, eyes lost in the flames, while his mind drifted back to days long gone. Loneliness had become both his habit and his wound. On snowy nights when the valley lay buried in silence, Elias often stepped onto the porch, lifting his gaze to the cold silver sky. The moon hung suspended above, offering him comfort and sorrow all at once. He would wonder, would his life end just like this, slipping away quietly, remembered by no one, known by no one? But one night, when a snowstorm raged outside, everything changed. Elias had just dozed off when a strange noise came from the barn. At first he thought it was the wind slamming against the boards, but then it struck again, heavier, fiercer, as though the wooden beams themselves were being shoved aside. His dog barked wildly and his horse neighed in terror. Elias leapt up, grabbing the rifle he kept by the door. Throwing on his coat, he stepped out into the freezing gale. Each footfall sank into the ice, crunching sharply beneath his boots. The closer he got to the barn, the harder his heart pounded. And then he saw them, enormous footprints pressed deep into the snow, too massive to belong to any man. He swallowed hard. Memories of fireside tales from the town came flooding back, stories of a creature, both man and beast, wandering the wilderness. Folks called it by many names. The most common was Bigfoot. When Elias eased open the barn door, the lantern's dim glow revealed a sight that froze him in place. On a bed of straw lay an unconscious woman, her breathing shallow, as though dropped there by some enormous hand. Outside, through the thick mist, Elias glimpsed a towering silhouette, still for a moment, before it turned and vanished into the forest. That night, the long solitude of Elias Cooper was torn apart by a legend that stepped out of the shadows, leaving him with a mystery that would change his life forever. Part 1. The Toss. That winter night, the wind howled through the valley as if trying to tear the sky apart. Snowflakes struck his face sharp as blades of ice. Elias Cooper gripped his rifle tightly and stepped out of the cabin. His dog barked without pause, straining at the chain until the snow flew up in bursts. From inside the barn, his horse neighed in panic, hooves pounding wildly. Something was wrong. Elias could feel it in every ragged breath of the freezing air. The barn door rattled, shaking violently as though something heavy had slammed against it from the outside. Elias crouched low, the stock of the rifle pressed firm against his shoulder, eyes wide and unblinking. He had faced wolves before, and bears, and even bandits lurking in the night. But this time his instincts told him the presence outside was nothing he had ever known. As he drew closer, a sound rang out, not like a man's, nor like any beast's. It was low, drawn out, heavy, like rotted wood snapping beneath a massive footstep. Elias drew a deep breath, then shoved the barn door open. For the briefest moment he saw it, a colossal figure at the edge of the trees. taller than any man he had ever met, shoulders broad, draped in dark gray fur that hung like the branches of a winter tree. The silver moon outlined its vast frame, casting a shadow both majestic and terrifying. Its eyes glowed faintly through the mist fixed directly on Elias. He stiffened, finger-tightening on the trigger, but then instead of striking, the creature hurled something into the barn. A heavy thud echoed, straw scattering in every direction. Startled, Elias stumbled back, heart leaping into his throat. By the time he looked again, the door shook with the last tremor, and the towering shadow was already retreating, swallowed by the white fog gone into the forest. The dog growled and barked, high-pitched with tension. Slowly, Elias turned, rifle still raised, toward the dark, and then his gaze dropped, and his heart stopped. In the hay lay a woman unconscious. Her tangled hair was dusted with snow and ice, her lips pale blue, her face hollowed, but still carrying a fragile beauty. Her coat was torn, her body shivering, her breath so faint that Elias had to lean close to feel it. He staggered back a step, stunned. This did not look like prey abandoned to die. It looked like a deliverance. Why had Bigfoot brought her here? Why had it not killed her, but instead cast her into the barn, almost as if entrusting her to him? Elias stood at the edge of fear and instinct. Part of him longed to chase after the giant shadow, to pull the trigger and drive away the nightmare. But another part, the sliver of humanity still alive after all his lonely years, made him kneel, set down the gun, and place his hand gently against her neck. A heartbeat, fragile, but there. "My God," Elias whispered hoarsely, "you're alive." He quickly stripped off his heavy coat, wrapping it around her trembling body. Then he lifted her into his arms, his hands shaking, not only from the weight, but from a feeling he hadn't known in years, another human being held close against him. The dog followed, barking urgently, while the wind outside shrieked as though urging him on. Elias slammed the barn door shut and rushed toward the cabin, glowing with light. Inside the small room, the fire in the hearth crackled warmly, its glow dancing across the lined face of Elias. He laid the woman on the wooden bed, covering her with thick blankets, then sank into a chair, listening to each ragged breath she drew. In that moment, Elias understood everything had changed. She was not only a life in need of saving, she was a fragment of fate carried to him by a massive hand, or perhaps by a living legend, to shatter the solitude that had bound him for so many years. He glanced out the window. The forest beyond remained dark, the mist still rolling thick. Yet somewhere out there in the night, Bigfoot lingered, watching, waiting. Elias did not know why it had brought her to him, nor whether it was enemy or guardian. He knew only one thing: his life would never be the same again. Part 2. The Stranger in the Barn. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting golden light over the time-worn planks of the cabin. Elias Cooper's home was used to silence, broken only by the wind seeping through the walls and the gentle popping of burning logs. But tonight there was another sound in that room, a faint, fragile breath. The woman Elias had laid on the bed had remained unconscious for nearly 2 days. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she had come from, or why Bigfoot had carried her only to deliver her into his barn. All he knew was this: if he did not care for her, she would not survive the winter. Elias was a man of the West, used to tending wounded horses, patching saddles, or stopping the bleeding of cattle after a wolf's bite. But caring for a human being, especially a stranger, a woman, was something altogether different. His rough hands trembled as he dabbed warm cloth against the wound on her shoulder. Each time she moaned faintly in her fevered sleep, his chest tightened as though something long dormant had stirred awake inside him. On the 3rd day she stirred. Her eyes opened, clouded and dazed, like someone waking from a nightmare. Elias was sitting at the table when the soft cough startled him. He turned, meeting her gaze, pale blue, deep haunted. "You're awake," Elias said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. He poured water into a cup and carried it to the bed. "Drink. Your body needs it." She shook her head faintly, eyes fixed on him as if trying to ask questions she could not yet speak. Elias set the cup down, not pressing her. He stepped back, giving her space, showing he was no threat. That afternoon, Elias cooked soup from what little dried meat and vegetables he had left. The warm aroma filled the cabin, softening the cold that rattled at the windows. He placed the bowl by her bed, then sat across from her in silence. At last, with trembling hands, she lifted the spoon. Each mouthful seemed to bring her a breath more strength, a hint more life. When night fell again, Elias tried gently. "What's your name? Who hurt you?" The woman turned her face away. Her shoulders shook, but her lips remained closed. He caught the glimmer of a tear at the corner of her eye. Elias did not press further. He knew silence could be a kind of armor, and tearing it away too soon would only deepen the wound. Resting his hand on his knee, he sighed softly. "You don't need to say a thing. You're safe here. Just heal." Days slipped into nights. Somewhere in her fevered sleep she whispered a name, Clara. From then on, Elias called her that. Bit by bit, Clara regained her strength. Yet her eyes still carried the weight of something unspoken, as though guarding a past Elias could not reach. He noticed the smallest things, the way she flinched when the dog barked, how her fingers clenched the blanket, when the wind shrieked outside, the distant look in her eyes, when the firelight flickered across them. Everything about her spoke of a life marked by something colder than the western winter. For Elias, Clara's presence was like a new flame rekindled in a heart gone cold. He found himself rising early, not only to tend his cattle, but to be sure the cabin stayed warm for her. He no longer ate his suppers in silence, but cooked for two, though she managed only a few bites. More than once he caught himself watching her sleep, afraid that if he blinked, she might vanish with the mystery she carried. One evening, as Elias was adding wood to the fire, Clara spoke for the first time. Her voice was faint, but steady. "Why? Why didn't you leave me there?" Elias turned his eyes calm and plain-spoken. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind." Clara lowered her gaze, silent, but her lips quivered as if she wanted to say something more, then swallowed it back. Elias did not push. Instead, he poured her a cup of hot tea, setting it gently before her. "Drink. It'll help you sleep." Outside, the wind roared through the trees, snow falling heavy. Inside the cabin, two strangers sat across from each other in silence. Yet it was not the silence of distance, but the silence of two wounded souls finding a measure of comfort simply by being near. To Elias, Clara was no longer just the woman Bigfoot had thrown into his barn. She was a mirror reflecting his own grief, his fears, and his yearning for connection. And he knew from that moment on he would never see life the same way again. Part 3. Tracks in the Snow. That morning, the first rays of sunlight stretched across the valley glazed with ice. The air was unnervingly still, broken only by the distant barking of a dog and the wings of a crow cutting across the winter sky. Elias Cooper stepped out onto the porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands, his eyes drifting toward the barn. Inside the cabin, Clara was awake, frail but strong enough now to sit up. He let her rest while he made his way outside to check the land. The snow was thick, blanketing everything in silence, yet the footprints remained massive, carved deep into the frozen ground. They began at the edge of the woods, circled the barn, and disappeared into the dark line of pines beyond. Elias crouched down, pressing his hand against one of the prints. It was twice the size of his, so deep it had cracked through the hard crust of ice. A long breath slipped from his chest, part fear, part irresistible curiosity. "Bigfoot," he whispered as though speaking only to himself. When he looked back, Clara was at the window, her pale fingers gripping the wooden frame, her eyes following him with worry. Elias lifted a hand, signaling for her to stay inside. Then he took up his rifle and stepped into the forest, following the trail. The morning woods were cloaked in haze, shafts of sunlight filtering through thin mist, casting pale columns of light on the snow. Each step crunched beneath his boots, the weight of the rifle tapping softly against his coat. A flock of small birds startled and burst skyward as he moved deeper in. The silence pressed so heavy that he could hear the beat of his own heart. The tracks grew clearer, leading toward a narrow pass. Elias stopped, squinting against the glare of snow, and there it was, the figure, towering motionless, its breath rising in thick clouds of white against the cold. Elias raised his rifle at once, the stock firm against his shoulder finger, resting near the trigger. Years in the wild had taught him to shoot first before danger struck, but this time something in him faltered. The creature stood still. It did not charge nor retreat. Slowly it turned its head. Through the veil of mist, its eyes fixed on him, deep, unwavering. No growl, no attack. Only silence heavy with both challenge and truce. A branch snapped under Elias's boot, sharp in the stillness, sending a flutter of birds overhead. Bigfoot shifted its massive shoulders, rising with a weighty breath, but still it did not advance. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. In his mind, two voices battled. One screamed survival, pull the trigger, end the threat. The other was quieter, steadier. Not every shadow comes to harm. He thought of Clara. That night, Bigfoot could have ended her life with ease. Instead, it had brought her to his barn as though bearing her like a wordless messenger. Could it be that the creature had saved her? Elias lowered the rifle, slow and deliberate, his breath spilling white into the cold air. "I won't shoot," he murmured, as if making a vow to himself. The giant did not move at first. Then, with a steady turn, it walked away, leaving deep impressions in the snow. Each step made the earth tremble faintly, but there was no haste in its stride, only calm, as if it knew Elias would not follow. Elias stood frozen. His hand trembled not from the cold, but from the weight of the choice he had just made to trust rather than fear. He followed the tracks back toward the cabin, his mind heavy with thought. Clara was there waiting, her eyes searching him with unease. She noticed the rifle still loaded, never fired. "Did you see it?" Her voice was faint, yet tight with dread. Elias nodded, setting the rifle down. "Yes, but it didn't attack. It just watched." Clara fell silent, clutching the blanket closer. In her eyes was fear, but something else too. Something Elias could not yet name. He sat across from her, his gaze calm but deep. "Clara, I don't think it means us harm." The fire crackled, light flickering across two weathered faces. Outside, the footprints remained etched in the snow, a reminder that the legend was not merely a shadow of the wilderness, but perhaps a guide, a silent guardian. That night, Elias stayed awake long after Clara had fallen asleep. He sat by the window watching the forest sink into mist. Each time the wind stirred, he thought he glimpsed that colossal figure moving between the trees, and instead of fear, a strange feeling grew in him, respect, and somewhere deep within, a quiet gratitude. Part 4. Whispers of the Town. On the western frontier, rumors traveled faster than the storm winds. Within days, the little mountain town was buzzing. Some claimed to have seen massive footprints circling the woods. Others swore they had heard a thunderous roar echoing in the blizzard. And as always, each retelling twisted the tale, feeding a fear that soon belonged to everyone. In the old wooden saloon, lantern light flickered against smoke-stained rafters. Sheriff Daniels sat at the center table, his fingers drumming against a beer mug, his eyes narrowed. "We can't have that thing prowling near town forever. Folks are losing cattle, children are spooked. Someone's got to hunt it down." Hunter McGraw, a burly man with a wild beard, slammed the butt of his rifle on the floor, his voice booming. "Give me a few good men and I'll bring its head back to hang right outside this saloon." The men laughed, but beneath the laughter lay unease. Whiskey made them bold, but in their hearts they knew none of them had ever faced a giant like the one in the stories. In the corner, Old Man Harlan. The village elder with long silver hair shook his head. He tapped his pipe against the table, voice trembling yet firm. "You think it's just a beast to be hunted? I've lived long enough to hear the tales from fathers and grandfathers. There were times when the creature saved lost children in the forest, carried them back to safety. There were times it only watched, never harming a soul. It is no monster, it is a keeper of the boundary." For a moment the room fell quiet. Then McGraw barked a laugh, breaking it apart. "Saved them, you say, Harlan? You're too old to think straight. A thing that size either eats or kills. I swear I'll bring it down before it brings us down." Sheriff Daniels nodded, raising his hand to silence the room. "Whatever it is, we can't wait and see. Tomorrow night we'll ride the woods. If we find it, no questions, shoot." The news reached Elias as he rode into town for salt and cloth. The words struck him cold, his hands gripping the sack so tight his knuckles went white. He knew the truth was not what they believed. Bigfoot had carried Clara to him, not killed, not harmed. But to speak up would mean exposing her and secrets neither of them were ready to share. That evening back at the cabin, Elias told Clara what he'd heard. Her face went pale, her blue eyes flashing with fear. "They'll kill it, even though it saved me." Elias sat at the table, his rough fingers tapping slow against the wood. "If I speak the truth, they'll drag you out, force you to tell it all. I can't let that happen." Clara lowered her gaze, thin fingers clutching the blanket tight. She whispered, "Elias, you don't understand. Bigfoot isn't what they think. It knows me. It took me away from a place I couldn't escape." Elias studied her long and hard, his eyes deep as winter ice. He asked no more, sensing she wasn't ready. But inside, a battle raged between the fear of men and the truth of something greater, something that carried a strange light of salvation. That night, Elias sat guard on the porch, rifle by his side, eyes fixed on the forest's dark edge. In the wind, he thought he heard the heavy echo of footsteps, then silence. And he knew the line between man and legend had never been thinner. Part 5. Not Every Shadow. Harms that night, the western sky was thick as tar. The wind whistled through the pines in long, ghostly tones like 1,000 spirits whispering in the dark. Elias Cooper stood on the porch of his cabin, rough hands gripping his rifle tight. He had heard the distant clatter of hooves, the hushed voices that could not hide in the silence. The hunters had arrived. Clara sat by the window, her trembling figure outlined by lamplight. "Elias," she whispered, "they'll kill it. They don't understand." Her voice broke. Elias laid a hand on her shoulder, his eyes calm yet heavy. "Stay inside. I won't let that happen." Out in the snow, shadows moved. McGraw, the bearded hunter, had been circling the ranch for hours. The stock of his rifle glinted under the silver moon. 2 men flanked him, weapons ready, eyes darting in every direction. The air was thick, suffocating. Elias could hear his own heart pounding steady like a drum of war. And then through the veil of fog it came. A massive form emerged from the forest. Bigfoot. It stepped forward, broad shoulders cloaked in snow, each stride heavy yet unhurried. Not a predator on the hunt, but something older, a sentinel crossing a boundary for reasons deeper than hunger. "There it is," McGraw hissed, eyes alight with feral glee. He raised his gun finger, curling around the trigger. At that instant, Elias strode out from the porch, his voice carrying like thunder. "Don't," McGraw spun, snarling. "You've lost your mind, Cooper. This is our chance." But Elias did not lower his hand. He stepped into the snow, planting himself between the hunters and the giant. "If you fire, you'll have to shoot through me first." The night froze. The men behind McGraw shifted uneasily, caught off guard. None of them had expected an old rancher to stand guard over a monster. McGraw's teeth clenched, voice bitter with rage. "You're protecting it. That thing will kill us all." Elias gave no reply. He turned instead toward the towering figure. Moonlight revealed its tangled fur, its breath rising in pale clouds. Bigfoot stood silent, neither charging nor retreating. Slowly it lowered one massive hand, placing something onto the snow. The faint gleam of metal caught Elias's eye. He stepped closer. A knife, old, worn, with a single name etched into the blade, Whitmore. His chest tightened. Elias turned toward the cabin. Clara stood frozen at the window, her eyes wide, tears spilling down her face. That was her name, her past carved into steel. Bigfoot had not only saved her, it had returned a piece of the life she thought lost forever. Elias knelt, lifting the knife with trembling fingers. His gaze rose, locking with the creature's. In that silent exchange, he understood. This being was not a destroyer. It had carried Clara to safety. It had given back her memory. It had chosen mercy. Bigfoot stepped back, its shoulders dipping in what felt like a gesture of respect. Then the fog curled thick around its form, swallowing it into the night. No roar, no threat, only silence, solemn, dignified. McGraw cursed, raising his rifle again, but this time his companions held him back. "McGraw, Can't you see? It didn't attack. The fight drained from the air. McGraw spat into the snow, lowering his gun with fury he could not spend. You'll see. I'm right. With a growl, he pulled his coat tight and stalked off into the darkness, his men trailing after. Elias remained, the knife heavy in his hand. Clara rushed from the cabin, tears streaking her cheeks as she touched the blade with trembling fingers. That was my father's, she whispered. I thought it was gone. I thought everything was gone. Elias pressed the knife into her hands, his voice rough yet tender. It gave it back to you. Not every shadow means to harm us, Clara. Inside the cabin, the firelight wrapped around them warm and steady. Two souls sat close, their hands clutching a relic, hearts full of a truth they could no longer deny. Sometimes legends do not come to haunt. Sometimes they heal. Some legends heal. Dawn washed the valley in gentle rose light. The storm had passed, leaving the forest glittering with ice, the pines sparkling like shards of broken glass reflecting the sun. Smoke curled upward from the cabin's roof, carrying the familiar scent of burning pine wood into the clear sky. The cattle grazed quietly as if the long nights of fear had never been. The old dog stretched across the porch, eyes half closed, soaking in the warmth. The horse pawed the ground, tail swishing lazily as though declaring winter's grip had finally loosened. Elias Cooper sat in his old wooden chair on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. Beside him, Clara Whitmore rested under a thin wool blanket, her face healthier, now touched with color. In her hands, the knife marked Whitmore glimmered in the morning light, both keepsake and proof of an impossible truth. For a long while, neither spoke. Their eyes lingered on the forest, where the fog was thinning, where the giant had vanished. In that silence, Elias felt something shift inside him. He was no longer the hollow man bound to solitude. Clara's presence and the shadow that had walked out of legend had restored his faith that the world still held things worth believing in. Softly, Clara whispered, her voice unsteady but warm. Elias, without you, I wouldn't have survived. But without it, I don't think I'd ever have found my way here. Elias nodded, gaze drifting toward the endless trees. His words came slow, steady. Some shadows mean to frighten us, but some shadows choose to protect. Bigfoot chose to save you. Clara's lips curved in the faintest smile. Her hand closed around the knife's hilt. Not every legend is born to terrify. Elias set his mug aside, his eyes gleaming with new light as he looked into the forest where the pines stretched beneath the rising sun. In the Wild West, between darkness and legend, it is kindness that bridges man and the unknown. They sat in silence, letting the truth settle into the wind. The old dog barked once sharp and clear before settling down again, as if declaring peace restored. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the valley. The little cabin no longer stood as a monument to solitude, but as a symbol of healing. Elias and Clara sat side by side, two wounded hearts mended by grace and mystery. And deep within the forest, where no one dared follow a legend, walked on not to spread fear, but to remind mankind that even giants can carry mercy. In the Wild West, between shadow and legend, kindness is the bridge that binds us to the unknown. If this story touched you, leave a comment, subscribe, and stay with us for the legends yet to come.